Marianne with the Cooperative Extension and the Master Gardeners, and I am very pleased to announce our speaker today, Master Gardener Rodney Holcomb, is going to talk to us about bonsai. And I misplaced all of his details, so if somebody sees a write-up about Rodney on it, you know that it belongs to me. So I'm going to let Rodney tell me a little bit about himself and then tell us about how to do bonsai. So take it away.
Great. Thank you, Marianne. So good morning, everyone, and let me know if the volume is not good. Hey, Alan, how are you? So I'm Rodney Holcomb, also known in the Transylvania Times as Rodney Bonsai. I was concerned many of you might not recognize me today because I've let my hair grow out long. I like to do a little comedy with my presentation, and Steve told me I had to edit curse words. So I'm trying to be a little self-restrained here. So I've been in Transylvania County. We purchased our home in 2017, and we moved here in 2019. I have been a gardener since 1990. When I started gardening, when we bought our first house in Dallas, Texas. And if you want to know what Dallas, Texas gardening is like, it is digging into hard clay and finding out that only the very toughest, predominantly natives, do well in hard clay. But if you amend it with compost, you can have an absolutely stunning garden. And there's actually a lot of learnings about that have transferred to Transylvania County, where we also have a lot of clay, and when you amend that with compost, you get a much better growing medium. So my introduction to bonsai actually came in my teen years. I had a classmate who she and her family moved to Little South Georgia, a little town called Waycross. They were English, and they introduced me to three great things: bonsai, public broadcasting system, and gin and tonics. And I've had a lifelong love of all three ever since. And so off to college, didn't do anything, but always appreciated the art of bonsai. And then about 6 years ago, I bought 3 trees. These 2, and one that I killed within a year. And I'm just going to say, you will kill trees. So just know, if you're going to do bonsai, you're going to kill trees. Everybody kills trees. You learn from it, and you move on. We lived in Charlotte from 2007 to 2010, and I took a class. There's a great bonsai center, bonsai learning center that has 2 locations in North Carolina, and one is in Statesville, and I took a class. I had a beautiful, it was a Hinoki cypress or pine. It was really stunning, and I killed it. And I killed it because I traveled. So my point here is, if you travel a lot, bonsai may not be for you unless you get someone you can really trust to help with watering. So with that, we're going to move on. I would like to also add, 50 years ago, when I was first introduced to bonsai, most of that was coming out of Japan, and I have not had the joy of traveling there, but it is a very rule-ordered society. So when you look at some very specific trees that have been developed in Japan, they have a series of bonsai rules that they follow, and a lot of them start out with, you want your largest lower branch to be 1/3 up the base of the tree. You want your branches to point out in different directions. So they're very specific about some of their concepts and rules. In the US, in South America, in Western Europe, you're seeing a lot more naturalistic types of bonsai. And I think I've got a photograph that will show. And if you go to the North Carolina Arboretum, you'll also see that their collection is much more naturalistic. So we're going to talk about the history of bonsai, tree selection and styles, care, I'm going to toss in some recommendations and give you some resources, and hopefully we'll have time for questions. And by the way, in the US, we pronounce it bonsai. In Japan, they pronounce it bonsai. So my recommendation is, when you're with someone and they say bonsai, just go with bonsai. And if you're with someone who says bonsai, go with bonsai, and you'll just be fine. But bonsai, the practice originated in China, and it was known as penjing. And that originated, we know we have examples of it in artwork around 600 to 700 in the Common Era. So clearly it had been developed before that. So you're talking about a practice of growing a tree in a pot that has been around for probably 2,000 years, if not longer. It was originally an elite art form in China, and then it was adopted by the Japanese around 1185 to the mid-1300s. And the Japanese are known for taking Chinese bonsai styles and techniques and really refining them. A lot of that was influenced by the Zen Buddhist culture at the time. And so when Japan opened up as a country around 1800, the practice spread to Europe, and from there it's just gone crazy. I'd also like to add in an interesting kind of twist. The Chinese now have rediscovered bonsai, and they have gone crazy. And they're getting the majority of their product out of Japan. This has been upsetting to people in the US who used to love to go to Japan. We're talking high-end product here. We're not talking your B.B. Barnes, $15 juniper. We're talking about trees that have been grown for 100 years and might cost $2,000 as a bare root tree. But the Chinese are coming in and buying them out lock, stock, and barrel, which is turning out to be pretty good for the Japanese. So the first thing with tree selection. So with bonsai, you can pretty much bonsai anything, because with the right techniques, what you're doing is growing something that's going to grow out in nature in a much smaller pot. You're going to need, the biggest thing you need to focus on to begin with is whether you're going to pick an indoor or an outdoor selection of species. So for you all who've been to our house, you know that our house is in the woods and lower down the mountain. I don't get sufficient sun to grow like a bougainvillea species of tree in the house, or truthfully even a jade tree or a ficus. Those are all great indoor species. So the first thing you're going to need to do is decide whether you're going to do indoor or outdoor species. The outdoor would include your broadleaf evergreens, your deciduous trees, your conifers, and you're going to look for a tree where the leaf size is proportional to the trunk. Now, when you actually do bonsai, when you put a tree in a pot, just that fact helps to reduce the leaf size. And then there are some very specific techniques that you would do that would reduce the leaf size more, so that your tree leaf size is really, you're trying to get a proportion to the overall tree. So one of the things, I was on a walk yesterday and I was looking at rhododendrons. And they have these really long leaves, and I thought, even if I saw a really beautiful rhododendron with really great structure to it, I'm not sure you could reduce the leaf size of that sufficiently enough to give it nice proportions. So these are 5 of the most accepted bonsai styles. So you've got the formal upright, informal upright, you've got the slanting, You've got the cascade that goes down, and then you've got the semi-cascade. So there is some debate in the bonsai world about the number of styles. More traditionalists will say these are 5 styles that are core to bonsai practice. Others will say there's 15, 17, that number. I'm going to show you those in the next slide. One thing that I do want to point out, if you look at the formal upright on the far left-hand side, you're going to see, and this is common to bonsai, your lower limbs are going to extend out further, and then with a formal upright, you've got the trunk of the tree going upright, very straight, and then the tree going this shape. And in all of these, if you look at the top of the tree, the apex, you'll see that it's rounded. So one of the things that being asked to do this presentation, so thank you, Elaine, helped me is get serious about these 2 trees. So I have had these 2 trees for about 6 years. I bought them from a gentleman who was aging out of the practice, and his wife was harping on him, not harping, let me rephrase that. She was telling him it was time to cut back. And when I went to his house, he must have had 250 trees. And he was well into his 80s and not in good health at all. So what had happened with these trees is that he had just kind of let them grow without a lot of attention. And then I was foolish enough to buy them. My number one goal was to keep them alive. The one that I killed was really, I hate to say this because it sounds, it wasn't a great tree by any stretch of the imagination. So it was a practice tree. So I practiced on it. And I did really well killing it. So let me just pause a moment and tell you what I'm going to do to this tree this year. So I've reined it in a little bit in this direction at the bottom. You can see some of these cuts. I'm going to go back and actually cut it a little bit more. I trimmed out anything that's growing straight up. I trimmed out crossing branches. I trimmed out some of the stuff that was dead. And then I'm going to come in and try to wire some of these bigger branches down just a little bit. You have to be very careful with a tree this old because there is nothing so horrendous as overwiring and hearing the snap of a branch. So that's some of the things that I'm going to do with this tree. And every tree has its best face. Now I'm looking at my friend here, Liz, and she has best face in any direction. But you can turn a tree and look at it in all different directions, and some trees have great faces all the way around. This one's not so bad in all directions. This tree is probably 55 years old. So, and this is a Japanese Zelkova. So they're known for this beautiful kind of grayish bark with some movement in the trunk. This is a Chinese elm. This is a great tree to start with. They're relatively inexpensive if you're starting with bonsai. Now, when I say that, after looking at some of the prices lately, I might be able to price that for $850. I was really surprised when I went online and did some of this. This tree does not have a lot of pretty faces. That's a better face. This is not a great face because I don't have, it's not bad, but I don't have enough growth coming out in this direction. That's actually not bad, but when you have a tree where you're showing the face like this, you're not seeing these 2 trunks. And the one thing with bonsai that gives the appearance of age is the bottom of the trunk. And this is known as the nabari. So that is where your trunk goes into the soil and you show the roots. I've actually been recommended to lift this tree out some more and take another 3/4 of an inch of soil off of that and expose that root flare more often. I would also like to add, as a master gardener, anytime you plant a tree, especially in Transylvania County, we say plant high and dry, and your root flare should be exposed. If you've got a tree where the soil is up here, you're going to kill that tree. And the same thing for bonsai as well. All right, back to bonsai styles. So you see these beautiful styles, and then here are some more. So you've got the broom style on the left. The next one over is raft, and that's where this is an interesting one. You can take a tree that has had one side of it has died, and you can actually turn the tree over a few years and plant it in your soil medium where the branches that are living on that one side will come up, and that's called raft style. And you've got double trunk. I'm not going to go through these, but you can see the different styles. I'm particularly fond of windswept because we have some beautiful windswept trees here in the mountains of western North Carolina. So you've decided indoor or outdoor trees. Now we're going to talk briefly about placement. So with indoor trees, they usually need a south-facing light. They need lots of sun. And if you do not have a humidifier in your house, you're going to need to give that tree humidity. So you can do that with like a humidity tray, like a plastic tray that you're constantly filling with water because you're causing this or creating this microclimate right where that tree is. Outdoor trees require dormancy and cold, and so let's talk about that. When you think about trees and shrubs, that normal growing cycle. So in the spring, they flush that new leaf growth, and those leaves work hard. Spring and summer, they are making plant food, they're doing photosynthesis, and then in the fall, those leaves start turning all sorts of beautiful colors, and that energy comes down from the tree, pulls into the tree, down the core, and goes into the roots. So if you have an outdoor bonsai, like a cedar, and you put it inside, and you enjoy it, and you love it, you're going to kill it because it needs to be outside. You have to be careful, though, because with all this cold weather that we've had, if you put a bonsai, you've got your bonsai in a pot, if you put it out there and it drops down to a certain temperature for that specific tree species, your roots are going to freeze. And if you freeze your roots, you're probably going to kill your pot. So what do? You can put them in outdoor species. You can put them in your garage. I built this, and I'm quite proud of it, this fold-down tray or shelf. So in the winter, I lift it up, support it with a couple of 2x4s. I put my trees there. They get a little bit of sunlight. They don't need sunlight in the winter because they're in that dormant period, and that's where they overwinter. And my garage typically doesn't get colder than, say, probably the mid-30s, even when it gets too cold. You also have to be careful about not overprotecting them. They do need some of that cold. Now, a lot of folks will take their bonsai trees, find a south-facing wall of their house, put it in the ground, clear the soil, lay it on the ground, and then cover this whole thing with a layer of mulch up to the root ball. And then if we get down into, say, the 20s Fahrenheit, they'll take a sheet and cover it to avoid root burn. Now, I saw Mary Ellen. Hi, Mary Ellen, how you doing? Mary Ellen and I, our neighborhoods back up to one another. And we have the same issue, deer. Now, I don't know if you all know this. There are a list of plants that deer will not eat unless you grow them in conesty. And Mary Ellen has sworn on this, that she has planted, plants that deer will not eat, except, and of course, when you live in conesty. I put this out one year in the winter and went to let my dog out. And when I opened the door, off she went. I mean, like a bullet. And I looked over, and there was a little deer just beginning to nibble on the tender growth. Caught it in time, brought the plants back in. And I've been thinking that there are some sections in my property where the house is so we're at the end of the driveway. That's close enough to the house that these would probably be safe from deer. But here you have to really think about it. And the risk of not catching it and then having 20 years of working with a bonsai be nibbled away, to me, isn't worth it. But it is a consideration for here. How we doing? Is this good? Yeah. Okay. All right, bonsai care pots. I feel bad because I'm trying not to move around too much or I'm going to get in trouble. Okay, so you basically have glazed pots or unglazed pots. One thing you're going to have, I don't want to drop, you're going to have drainage. You've got to have drainage in a bonsai pot. Bless you. This is a material, it's plastic. I'm just going to pass this around. You can feel that. That goes over your drainage holes. Now, you can buy that, and it's not cheap. You're not going to ruin your child's inheritance. Or you can go to a big box store. Who's done drywall here before? You've got the white tape, or you've got that mesh tape that's sticky. It works great as well. And I mean, one roll is going to last you forever and ever. So you've got different kinds of pots. Glazed pots are typically more for what are considered feminine trees. Unglazed is more for a more masculine tree. And so this is part of the art of bonsai. So this to me is a very masculine looking tree. It's got hard angles to it. It's got this nabari that says I've been around. It's got some nice taper to it. Even the same with this one. It's got a big trunk. It's got some great movement to it. These are both what I would consider a more masculine tree. Do you all want to look at these? With that, you want to pass them around? Lonnie, you want to pass that one too? Yep. But there are some tree species. I was just at a Blue Ridge Bonsai Society meeting this past weekend, and there was and I'm going to mispronounce it. I would have pronounced it Satsuki azalea, but I think they pronounce it like Satsui or something like that. So if someone knows, please tell me later. But they have a very small leaf, naturally, before you even bonsai them. And a number of them were in glazed pots, and they were absolutely stunningly beautiful. There are some specific kind of guidelines that your pot height is going to be equal to the trunk above the nabari. So one of the criticisms I've had of this pot is that it's too deep. And this tree species doesn't really require this deep of a pot. So I could get away with a pot that's a lot more shallow, And I'd probably raise this a little bit to give it more of that dramatic flair. And then you can see, so you can buy cheap pots. This is a cheap plastic pot for bonsai with holes and drainage. Or you can buy, this is not an expensive pot, but you can buy pots that are hand-thrown by known bonsai masters, and you can burn through your children's inheritance doing that. And a lot of people do that. One of the other things you may be able to see, so you have your large drainage holes. You also have two smaller holes on either side of your drainage hole. And the reason for that is you take copper wire or either anodized aluminum wire, and you put through those little holes and you tie it around the root structure of your bonsai. And what that does is help secure the bonsai in the pot. I've never done it because I'm a bad bonsai person. But I also recently found out that what it helps is it just keeps it tighter, and that actually helps with better root development as well. And if you're in a high wind area, you absolutely need to be doing that. So the next time these trees get repotted, they'll be getting their wire as well.
And how often do you repot them?
Coming to that shortly, and it's a great question. So yes, Mandy.
Let's say you've got a pot you really like, but it's deeper than that. Could you layer it in such a way with like rocks or something to still provide the drainage?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to go ahead and answer. Lonnie's question was, how often do you repot? I would not repot a tree you don't want to do it more than once a year. You repot a tree twice in the same year, you're going to run a very good chance of killing that tree. And what you're doing when you're repotting, and it's really a pretty gruesome process. You lift the tree out. This tree got heavily root bound last year. I did not pay enough attention to it. So when I pulled it out and repotted it last year, the root mass was square. I mean, it was solid roots. And I was like, oh, that's not good. So you take the tree out. You take the tree out and you start scraping the sides with this tool. Now you can make your own. I've seen some great ones that are made out of like old forks and things. And you take away that soil and you expose that root mass, and then you cut away a significant portion of it. And the first time you repot, it is the most horrible thing because you think, I'm going to kill this tree. And there is some stress when you have a 55 or 60-year-old tree, that think about how many people's hands have touched that tree. You're like, I don't want to kill this. But it really is good for the health of the tree. So you cut those roots, and you're leaving the tree with a structure of very fine roots, and then you repot it. So I want you all to look. This is going to be your quiz question for today. Take a look at these two images. The one on the left actually follows the guidelines of pot size for the tree. The one on the right does not. Which do you like best? So, you know, it's interesting, and these are considered more feminine pots because of the color and the light glaze to them. When I looked at these, what I liked about the one on the left is, to me, when I'm looking at it visually, the smaller pot size makes my eye go more up. The one on the right makes a better statement of the whole shape of the tree. So it really is, there are these rules and guidelines follow what your eye loves, follow what your heart loves. All right, bonsai care. So we're going to talk about soil. So this is some not Chobani low-fat yogurt, which is probably going to make a lot of people happy here. This is bonsai soil that I bought in a mix. And we'll just pass that on. And if you could pass that one too, right around the corner. Thank you. So that's a very traditional mix. This is Akadama, pumice, and lava rock. You don't use regular soil in bonsai. And the reason for that is regular soil, when you continue to dry it, is going to harden. The other thing about this mix, and it was hard for me to conceptualize this to begin with, but one of those components of that bonsai mix holds on to moisture. And for those of you who've gone through the Master Gardener program and who get a soil test, one of the things you want with soil is what they call friability. You want soil that's loose and crumbly, that oxygen and air are going to get into the soil so that plants can move their roots down and pull those nutrients out and that water out. And so that mix will provide that. Now, I will tell you, that mix is expensive. So the North Carolina Arboretum actually uses a mix of organic soil composted with pine bark and peat moss and some shale to it. So when you think about those, that pine bark is chunky. And so it's going to provide that aeration along with the shale as well, and then you'll get some good moisture retention too. All right, watering. Steve, I'm moving down here, trying to get my steps in. So I bought this either at Tractor Supply or B.B. Barnes. I can't really remember which. And I had bought this really beautiful one from England. It was stunning. It was green. It had a nice long spout to it. This aerator at the end is nice. And within a year and a half, this part of it separated. And I tried to fix it, and it lasted about another year. So I went with cheap and galvanized. When you're watering, what you want to do is water from the top and let the water just cascade down your plant, your tree, into the soil. Pause, and you want to water until you're seeing water moving out from underneath your pot because you've got your drainage holes. Then you want to give it a 5-minute rest, and just for good measure, come back and put some more in. Think of it like Paula Deen. You know, if half a stick of butter is going to be good, then 2 sticks of butter is going to be even better. You don't water on a schedule. You water on the plant's needs. So if you all come up and feel this pot, this is still pretty, it's a little bit damp. This one, that's a little bit damp as well. I put my bonsai on stands on my back deck in the growing season because I see them every morning. And if that's another, it's for my personal bias. If I put them somewhere where I'm not seeing them, I'm forgetting about them. And there is nothing like the panic of looking out your window and seeing a 60-year-old tree that you forgot to water 2 days ago, and the leaves are looking like this. And it will take a tree. You can kill a tree like that, as I've mentioned before, or it will just stun it where it takes another year or 2 for it to recover. All right, so fertilization. Indoor trees, Fukian tree, a jade tree, a ficus tree. Bougainvilleas are very good for indoor trees. If you've got the light for those specific trees, you are actually going to do fertilization year-round. That is not the case for your outdoor trees. You're going to fertilize those trees during the growing season. So we will probably, bonsai folks will start taking their trees out late March into April and start the fertilization process then. And you fertilize from April into August. And you also fertilize based upon the tree the needs of the tree. So if you have a bonsai tree like this one that's an older tree, I use a much more balanced fertilizer that's a 5-5-5. And if I had a new tree and I wanted it to grow more rapidly, I would use something that had a higher nitrogen content to it. Also, let me go back to a point about growing pots. So bonsai masters will tell you, grow the trees that are in your neck of the woods. So I don't want to see you all out on the highway digging up pine trees now, but you will see people, if you're on YouTube videos or online, you'll see people who will find a specimen and dig it up, and they'll put it in a huge pot. Or they will bring this huge, ugly root mass and tree home, and they'll dig a huge hole, and they'll leave it in the ground for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. What you're doing is you're growing the size of the trunk. So a couple of points here. Once you put a bonsai tree into a pot, you're not going to get significant growth of that nabari. And the other thing about trees is they grow outward, so you get this wild growth, and this branch is not proportional to these other branches, but I'm letting this grow this season. I'll let it grow another 2 or 3 seasons and let it have pretty wild growth, and that will thicken that branch as well. All right, repotting. We've talked about this earlier. So older trees like this one, I'll probably repot that now every 3 to 5 years. Younger trees, these Chinese elms grow crazy. You're going to trim this back all through the growing season. And because of that fast growth, this tree will probably get repotted a little more quickly, but a little less so because it's an older tree. This tree is probably 35 or 40 years old. So when do you repot? So you repot late winter and early spring. You don't repot twice in 1 year. You don't repot if you start seeing, you can see it on this one if you come up. You'll see the buds are just beginning to show. If you repot when your leaves have started greening out, think about what you're doing to that plant. It has sent all of its energy up to its branches to say, hey, photosynthesis time to get back to work. Let's make energy for the tree. And then you're cutting those roots, and they're not going to have that ability like they did to move nutrients and water up into the tree, and you'll put your tree at risk. Older trees tend to be a little more picky about what you do to them, and you'll find bonsai masters will be more gentle with older trees. And so let's say a couple of years ago when I realized I had let this get terribly root bound, the thing I could have done is just constructed a pretty rudimentary wooden grow pot, pulled the whole thing out, kind of spread the roots out, stuck it in there for another season, and then later that next winter come back and done an appropriate root trimming. How we doing? I think we're getting to the end. So bonsai care, overwintering. And we've talked about this a good bit. So do keep them, they need the cold. So if it's an outside tree, give that tree what it needs. But also, do your research. Get online, join a local club, talk to people. If you're buying bonsai specimens from trees that don't grow here, know what that tree needs and then try your best to replicate that here in Western North Carolina. So trees like maples, elms, beeches, junipers, pines, and azaleas, those can all go outside in a protected area and then provide a wind screen as well when temperatures drop and we have heavy winds. So pruning. So just like, how many folks have Japanese maples in their yard? Great. How many folks have winterberry trees? Great. So if you find your trees out in your yard are getting too big for the spot that they're in, or you've got cross branching, you're going to do the same kinds of trimming on those trees that you would for bonsai. Except with bonsai, you've got to have light coming in through the different layers of your branching. Because if I let this thing go for 10 years and it just became this mass of green, like a big ball, like a boxwood of green, you're not going to have any growth on the interior of leaves. Now, as you cut these back, and what happened, some of these big ugly scars I've got here on this tree, I cut it back pretty heavily a few years ago. I'm trying to get some back budding, and I have a branch down here. I'm not touching that branch. It needs to grow for a few more years. I'm not wiring it. I'm not doing anything with it. I just want to see if it will actually live, and then you can back bud. Apparently with Chinese elms too, you can scratch them on the surface, do a tiny little cut, and theoretically get a branch growth from that. So wiring. So these are some of the tools. And I bought these tools in 2006. And they've been in my expensive container ever since. These are tools that you would use for cutting thicker branches. This is for trimming finer branches. Chopsticks, oh my gosh, the best tool ever known to a gardener. And why do I say this? So I weed my moss beds with chopsticks. When you use this soil mix and you have repotted your plant, you want that soil and those roots to get integrated. So what you'll see is people poking around like this. So if I were repotting this plant today, I would lay down a layer of the potting mix that I'm going to use. Then I would put the tree down. Then I would put the potting mix around those roots, maybe a couple of inches, and I would take this chopstick and just start working that potting mix around the roots and then continue to layer that and build it up. You can buy expensive ones that do the same thing. This is aluminum bonsai wire. So when you're wiring, and the reason you wire is you'll see when you start looking at bonsai trees, a lot of times if the tree has been well cared for decades, you'll see the lower branches will be wired, will be pointed downward. And that's because of wiring. And these middle branches tend to move outward, and then you will have this upper apex. So if you've got a heavier branch, or if you've got a conifer, they are much harder. You've got to use more force when wiring those. You're going to use a heavy gauge of copper wire. If you ever see a bonsai with a lot of movement in it, that's either been done when the tree was very young, or you'll see bonsai with a material wrapped around the bark, and then the wiring wrapped around that. And that's to protect the bark from damage. Some folks will wire in December. Some folks, particularly like deciduous trees, like to wait until the leaves are out because then you're not wiring over a leaf bud. And you can buy really expensive copper wire. This is nice for actually, this wire has a very thin gauge and it's so wiring these very tip ends. Or you can buy anodized aluminum and it is much less expensive. Let me see if I've covered everything for wiring. Your wiring typically stays on for 6 to 12 months. Now I'm getting nervous because Barker actually knows about bonsai and he's here now looking at me. So one of the things you don't want to do though is you don't want to leave the wire on. So when you're wiring, what wiring does is you put, let's say this is a conifer and these are the branches. You're wiring from the main stem. You always start further on the trunk and then you come up this way. And you can use thinner wire as you get further along. And you always leave some exposed wire at the end. So let's say I've got this branch. This is going to be a horrible demonstration. This branch. But I want this branch, if I'm looking at it like this, I want this branch to move over and give me some volume here. You wire that tree, and when you do that, you can actually wire it where the branches will move out, and what was once your leader, maybe it was this branch, then becomes this branch. You don't want to leave your wire on for so long that it cuts into the bark. If it cuts into the bark just a little bit, you can get away with it. But if it has deep cuts, and you've seen that on trees where they will plant a tree and then they'll put wire around it and stakes to hold it, which is a practice that's not recommended anymore. And then they leave that on there, and 10 years later, the bark has grown an inch outside of that tree, and it's really harmful. Okay, so defoliation. This is scary. This is a practice when you take a healthy tree, a tree that you are absolutely convinced is healthy, and you strip it of every single leaf. It's usually done around June. And when you do that, you then take that tree and move it into shade. You don't want to have a tree that you've defoliated out in the heat. And what that does is, one, makes the tree a little cranky, but it tells the tree, flush out new growth, but that new growth will be smaller. So you wouldn't want to repot and defoliate in the same year. So you can tell you have to think about the tree. It's not just the design of the tree. You have to think about the health of the tree and what you want the tree, what you want to do with the tree, and what the tree is telling you it will accept. And that's based on a lot of factors. You can also defoliate parts of a tree. So you'll see people who will defoliate the apex, but leave this part. So it's easier on the tree, but you get smaller leaves up here, which to the mind's eye, I think, kind of tends to look somewhat natural, that smaller leaf growth up top. So we've talked about the trunk, the nabari. It anchors the tree. You want a nice taper. This tree, so I brought this, I wasn't going to bring this tree because there are some things about this tree that aren't so great. The thickness of this trunk, part of the trunk here, is very similar to the thickness of this part of the trunk. That's not ideal. If this were an ideal bonsai, this bottom trunk would be much thicker. You also can see this funky root that's growing up about an inch. I was going to trim that, and then I thought, well, you're here providing education. This is what happens when you let your tree get root bound. You get these kind of strange roots that pop up. So this will get cut later. Later this spring, what I'm going to do with this tree is actually pull it out of the pot. I'm not going to repot it, but I am going to wash away the soil around these roots and figure out exactly where my root flare is. And maybe some of these roots I can use to start training as the root flare. All right, I need to move on. So I've talked about the tools. That tool set right there has probably doubled in price in the last 20 years. That has everything I need, given my level of expertise. You can spend thousands of dollars on tools and I've seen people unwrap this just beautiful cloth with like 60 tools that the tools themselves are just works of art. So here are some recommendations. If you're going to start bonsai, and I'm going to break a friend's heart, I'm just going to say this. Don't buy bonsai seeds. Go to Walmart, go to Lowe's, go to Home Depot. If you're going to get an outdoor tree, dig around and find a good juniper that you want to play with and buy the juniper. And here's the reason I'm saying that. If you buy a bonsai set that comes seeds and all, soil and pot, you're not going to get here. It's going to take so long for that tree to look like it's aged that you will have aged out. And so I was at the Blue Ridge Bonsai Society meeting on Sunday, and by the way, I want to put a plug in for the Blue Ridge Bonsai Society and share this. I did not know this. This area of the country is nationally known for bonsai. The climate is great. We have some amazing, and in fact, I'm getting goosebumps talking about this, amazing bonsai masters. There were two that were at the program on Sunday. They had these beautiful azalea bonsais. Both of the guys had gone to Japan. They had selected trees that a grower had been growing for 100 years in the same family. Probably a $2,000 tree, $2,000 to get it back to the U.S. And then all that tree needed, it had the most amazing trunk to it. It was about this high. It was stunningly beautiful. And I said to the man, how much might I need to invest in that tree if I were going to purchase that today? And he said, well, you'd probably be pretty happy if you could pick it up for $8,000 to $10,000. So I texted my spouse, look what I just bought. So purchase an inexpensive tree because you're going to have fun with it. Know that you're going to kill them. You're going to kill 1 or 2 or 5 trees. You just are, until you learn exactly what that tree species needs. And then as you increase your commitment to bonsai, because they are a commitment, as you increase your knowledge and commitment, then you can buy better trees and work on them. This is just a quick timeline of indoor and outdoor, what the year would look like. So you can see for indoor, you're going to be watering and fertilizing all through the year. Outdoor is different. You're going to be watering through the year. That March, April time period, you're going to take them out of their storage for dormancy. That's generated not by month, but by your leaf buds, where you see those stage of leaf buds. And you stop fertilizing your outdoor trees by the end of August. Here are some resources. So the first one is the Blue Ridge Bonsai Society. That is local and on Facebook, and excuse the zero, I had changed that this morning. It's I think it's actually Blue Ridge Bonsai Society, BRBS in parentheses. The North Carolina Arboretum Bonsai Collection is amazing. There are a ton of great videos online. I like Bonsai Empire, and a lot of my images came from them. I like Living Art Bonsai Society. find things that you like, watch videos. And one of the things I like doing in watching the videos, because you get these masters, and I'm probably going to slaughter the pronunciation of his name. Gunawan Nakita is one that does a lot of online videos. And it's predominantly junipers. So in the bonsai world, there's as much snobbery there about tree species, like junipers, maples. They are like at the top of the bonsai world. Azaleas, they're a little further down. It's sort of like mountain view, valley view, I'm just going to say, living here in the mountains of North Carolina. But this guy will take a tree and you think, what is he going to do with that? And in this 15 or 30-second compressed video, he creates this tree that has age to it. And what I like to do is I'll start the video, I'll stop it, I'll click on the end, I'll see the end product, and then I'll watch it again and watch how he takes branches and does all this bending. And one thing, and you see this in a lot of junipers, is they'll take half of the trunk, one side of the trunk, and they'll peel the bark away to give it an aged look. You're not damaging this side, so the branches that are coming out of this side are going to continue to grow, but it will give it that aged look. And this summer, between June 4th and June 7th, the American Bonsai Society will be here at the North Carolina Arboretum. It's about $225 to register for the 3 days. The first day is really registration, and the classes and workshops and lectures begin on Friday. It will be an absolute madhouse, so anyone who's going, I most likely will be there. You probably need to carpool, but it's going to be some of the world's just truly amazing bonsai specimens will be there. There's going to be a juried show. It's in part being put on by the local chapter of the Blue Ridge Bonsai Society. The main sponsor is the Bonsai Learning Center that I talked about earlier that's in Statesville. And then this Curator's Journal, you can go online to curatorsjournal.net. That tells the story of how bonsai came to be at the Arboretum. All right. Marianne, I got in less than an hour. Didn't think it would take that long.